first in-person public lecture since the April COVID 2020 started. So we're really happy you're here. So I'm going to give you all a round of applause for being here. Thank you. It's been challenging up and down for all of us, and I think just the idea of gathering in person as humans, as social creatures, just like these incredible whales that we're going to talk about tonight, it's important. So if you're wherever you are, with your comfort with COVID, move around, move your chairs, need additional chairs. We just want you to be comfortable, guys, and enjoy learning again about the natural life that we have here, right here in our waters. And we're talking about it today. First off, let me introduce myself. If I've never met you before, my name is Chad Truxell. I'm the Executive Director of the Marine Discovery Center. And I'm very happy to be here and have you in person. But I was a high school teacher at this high school. If you don't know, this was the former New Smyrna Beach High School. And I, 2001 or 2, did a beach cleanup with students. And for extra credit, you need to come and meet at Flagler Avenue. We're going to do a big cleanup of the beach. And I had about 25 or 30 students show up, and we went north from Flagler, started to pick up trash. And within about 20 or 25 minutes, we saw a gigantic splash out in the ocean. And as we started to look again, another big splash in the ocean. And then a big peck fin came up, and then a big tail fin came up and splashed down, and then we knew. I knew, oh my gosh, that's a North Atlantic right whale. I had never seen one, only heard the stories. And my students didn't really realize, what is that? And then all of a sudden the whale breaches. And we sat there and watched this whale. I believe it was a juvenile whale at the time. I can't recall. I think it was just one, for an hour and a half. And it was a really unique experience for me that was very memorable. And since that time, I know I've had probably a dozen times, whether I got a call from Julie to say, hey, can you run out and check this out? And then the whole staff just closed the door and said, we're locking up. We're going to go look for whales. Or just on my own, seeing them. It's really a pleasure and a treat, but it's also really concerning. And you're going to learn more about that tonight. But I'll let the guest speaker from Marine Resources Council tell you more about it. But I do want to share some really positive news. We are celebrating 25 years this year. So 2022 is our 25th anniversary. So we're really proud of that. You all are a big part of that. We have a lot of things that we should be proud of. We've come a long way as a nonprofit. We've grown from surviving to thriving. And we look forward to really developing this site to be a regional resource for coastal ecosystems, education, restoration. This lagoon needs our attention. We know how many people are moving to this area, to Florida, every day. And we need to make sure that they know how special this is. Whether you're new here and you've lived here, whether you're visiting here, whether you've been here your entire life, we all need to share the responsibility of stewarding the lagoon and our coastal ecosystem. So thank you for joining us tonight and for being here. And please look out for more events that we'll have coming up. We have a upcoming event in March. Wendy, what's the
12th.
March? Thank you. March 12th. We'll be celebrating our anniversary right here on the site. Everyone is welcome. We'll have some nice refreshments, heavy hors d'oeuvres, and a big timeline of all of the things that we've done over the last 25 years, and an awesome story of the Marine Discovery Center. And some of you are actually going to be a part of that. We're going to give you a call here shortly to share that. But we're really excited, and that'll be coming up on the 12th. And then a lot of other special events coming up. So please be on the lookout for that. Also, if you'd like to support MDC, we always want to put these events on free, but we did bring an opportunity because many of us don't carry cash. So if you'd like to, this is really actually kind of cool. We found out about this. This is a feature. Whoops, I'm going to get in trouble if I break it. It's called a dip jar. But you can just put a debit card or credit card in there, and it'll go right to supporting our efforts and what we do at the Marine Discovery Center. Either way, we just appreciate you guys being here and supporting the Marine Discovery Center. So with all that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Mickey, our wonderful ambassador of these programs and the coordinator of our public lecture series and the master naturalist.
Everybody's faces. I mean, we've had 2 long years, and yeah, we're not out of the woods yet, but I don't know about you, I'm kind of zoomed out, and Zoom has its place, and it got us through some pretty rough spots. And we are filming this, so it's not going to be live, but people will be able to go on our website and look at it. It will be archived. So if you want to see it again, you certainly may. I guess I want to also tell you, some of you out here, I recognize a lot of faces, and many of you have taken our Florida Master Naturalist program. I just want to let you know we are going to start our Coastal Systems program on February 17th. So that's it'll be 6 weeks. It's Friday, 2 Thursdays, and then 4 Fridays. And I know 6 weeks sounds like a long time, but I think for those of you who've taken it, well, who's taken it? Who's taken the coastal class? Is it worth it?
Oh,
yes.
It goes great.
Well, anyway, if you want to learn more about your coastal ecosystem around you, it's a great program. We spend half the day in the classroom and half the day out on the lagoon, learning about what's out there. You get to do a lot of fun stuff, seine nets, fish. Anyway, come join us. I guess, and last but not least, as a courtesy to our speaker tonight, would you please put your cell phones on silent? That would be great if you just take a minute to do that now, and then that way Julie won't think that she's being called by somebody to attend a whale offshore. We want to keep her here as long as we can. I think Chad did mention the little dip jar there. The other thing, you guys, if you're not a member of the Marine Discovery Center, please join. It's not that expensive, and you also get a 10% discount in our gift shop. Unfortunately, I spend quite a bit of money on books in our gift shop because we have really good books, so check them out. All right, ready to go, Julie? I'm going to introduce our speaker, Julie Albert. She's the manager of the Marine Resources Council's North Atlantic Right Whale Conservation Program. She's been doing this for, I think, 20 years, 23 years, yeah, a long time. But she is the one who, if you guys are on this contact sheet and you call that 800 number, that's her. She's the 800 number. I go 3 feet.
Perfect, you're good. Yeah, you're good.
I wasn't like my big fat head in there. So, but Julie's going to talk to us about this. What she does is she trains volunteers. Many of you live on the condos, beachside. You are super important because you're going to be the ones who see these things first, and you're going to go, what am I seeing out here? And so she's going to tell you what you're going to see and how to identify it, and what do you do when you do see it, and what does that mean, and where do these calls go? So, Julie, thank you for being here tonight.
Well, welcome back to MTC after a 2-year drought of in-person presentations. So I feel special being here. How many of you have seen right whales before? Oh, wow, very cool. More people than I expected. I don't get that a lot. Like Lisa said, we're going to talk about the history of these whales, what to look for, what kind of role you guys play in how you can help them, and what the status of the population is. I'm going to warn you, this is not a happy-go-lucky talk. There's a lot of depressing information I'm going to present. I didn't see any kids in the audience. We've got some not-so-pretty pictures. So if anybody's got a queasy stomach, I'll try and warn you when we get up on that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. A lot of people get excited about hearing about whales because they're cool when they breach and they can go on whale watching trips, but this population is really in trouble, and we're going to talk about why. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the middle of it. I don't want to lose you guys when I discuss something. So, there's a good chance I'm going to cover a lot of your questions. Did we find a? Yes, we did. During the presentation, so let's see what happens. Like Lisa said, I've been trying to work with this. Chad. We've been doing this for 25 years. I've been with the program for 23. And what we do is a lot of public education. We teach people what to look for, how to identify these whales from other whale species that might be out there. We do a lot of public education, not just in settings like this, but also on the beach when we're out in the field with the whales. We document anybody approaching the whales when they're not supposed to be, so we can educate them on what the laws are. We also turn that information over to law enforcement if we have to. We extend the survey area for all the airplanes and the survey teams that go out doing nothing but specifically looking for right whales on every good weather day from December 1st through March 31st. We've got about 75 miles of coastline in the critical habitat area that is not covered by aerial surveys. So we really need coastal residents to keep an eye out and let us know when they see them so that we can help protect them. And I'm going to be talking about why that's so important. We do photo ID research while we're out there. We can actually identify the individual whales. So it's really neat to be able to track them, follow their migration histories, their reproductive histories. And whenever we can put a dot on a map that says there was a right whale here, that gives us the data we need to protect that area if it comes down to it. We also take sighting reports and make sure all the commercial and military vessels in the area know where the whales are. That information gets out to the local ports in the entire southeast U.S. because these whales go through waters that pass through the ports at Charleston, where are they? Charleston, Savannah, Fernandina Beach, Jacksonville Beach. We've got Port Canaveral, which is the second largest cruising port in the world, and one of their biggest killers is being struck by vessels. So we just want to make sure everybody out there knows what areas to avoid so that hopefully they don't get run over. So right whales right now are critically endangered. We think that there were probably about 15 to 20,000 of them before we started commercial whaling. That's just in the North Atlantic Ocean, between the eastern population that was off the coast of Europe, and there was western population, which is the one we have here off the coast of North America. They got international protection in 1935 once they became commercially extinct, and we think at the time there were probably fewer than 100 of them left. I've actually read a paper from DNA research that says that our current population came from 3 breeding females. So you can't get a whole lot closer to extinction than that and be able to rebound, and they managed to do it a little bit. But right now, our current population is 336. Not 300,000, just 336. So that's where we are right now. Right whales actually got their name from the whalers. Turns out these whalers figured out they were slow moving, which made them easy to catch. They also hung out very close to shore, which is what makes our volunteer sighting network work as well as it does, for the same reason that they could hunt them from shore. They floated when they were dead. So these whales as adults have blubber that is a foot thick in adults, and all that fat makes them float. So once they killed them, they took them for the baleen that they have in their mouths. Lisa, my Vanna. Why is that piece of baleen longer than I remember it being? That's baleen. So right whales have this in their mouth instead of teeth. And we used to hunt them for this before plastic was invented. So anything that was, well, we needed something that was stiff but flexible, came from whales. So they used this in caning in chairs, women's corsets, buggy whips, umbrellas, all sorts of things. It's made out of keratin, which is the same thing as our fingernails. So right whales had very long baleen, and they had a lot of it. So that was one of the reasons they were taken. And they were also killed for their blubber and their oil, which was used in lubricants for machines, soaps, oil lamps before we had electricity, They made perfume with it. They even put it in their food. So we used a lot of these whales, and they were close to shore. They were twice as valuable as blue whales, which were a lot farther offshore, and their baleen's really short. So it just made sense to go after these whales, which were really close to shore. They put very little effort into killing them, and then they got a lot out of them. So they just dubbed them the right whales to kill. It just kind of stuck. So here's all the stuff that they used. See, so I have these are the women's corsets, the whale oil lamp, and then here's a container of soap. So they've been protected for more than 80 years. They've got a very high death rate. These animals, their number one killer is entanglements with commercial fishing gear. Their second biggest killer, like I said, is vessel strikes. We don't let these animals live long enough to die a natural death, unfortunately. They've been studied for 40 years. We've never seen one die from old age or disease or plastic ingestion or toxicity. It's always either a fishing gear entanglement or a vessel strike. And there's a lot of them. On top of that, they've got a very low birth rate. We think a lot of that has to do with their ability to find food or lack thereof. They're starting to wait longer and longer between giving birth to one calf and then the next calf for an individual female. Right now, we've got whales that are waiting 10 to 13 years before they have another baby again. So that interval between calves has been increasing over the last 20 years. When I started this, they were giving birth every 3 to 5 years. And I'm going to talk about a very cool couple of whales that definitely deserve recognition this season. They actually came back after only 2 years. So they're very cool. Their food is shifting. So in the past, even if they weren't finding it in the abundance they needed, now they're not finding it in the places that they used to find it. So because the oceans are warming, their food source is shifting north to cooler waters, which means now the whales have to shift farther north to follow their food. It's taking them into areas that are not as protected as they would be in the U.S. So we'll talk about that. And then, the ones that do get entangled, the effects linger. The stress of an entanglement takes a toll physiologically on these animals, especially the females. So even after all of the rope is off them, they still might not get pregnant for several years. That's just a very stressful situation for them. So this is the food that they eat. Phew. Joel's got a jar of copepods that we're going to pass around so you can see how small these are. This was a picture taken with a microscope. They're crustaceans. They're like little tiny shrimp, but they're only about the size of the head of a pin. They don't get any bigger than the size of a grain of rice. And right whales like this particular species of copepod. It's called Calanus benmarchicus. And the reason they like it is because they have this fat or lipid sac in the middle of it that helps these whales really pack on weight in the summertime so that they can build up their blubber layer and use that the rest of the year because they're fasting when they leave the feeding grounds. So, unfortunately, for some reason, they haven't figured out that they can eat something else. If they don't find these copepods, they will just keep swimming until they find them. And we've actually watched their bodies shrink looking for food. Like, guys, just go eat different copepods, or find some little fish. They don't do that. So watching their food source shift and then watching the whales follow them is something that the scientific community has been keeping an eye on. So this is their range. They will go all the way from the southern tip of Florida up into, here's Cape Cod Bay, the Bay of Fundy, there's the Gulf of Maine. that was the historical feeding grounds for these animals in the summertime. Now, in the summertime, they go all the way up here into the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canada. Once they got to Canada, they didn't have the protections there between the fisheries, the speed of ships, and things like that. In 2017, there were 17 animals that died just in one summer. So for a population that small, that was a huge impact. So Canada had to really step up and put some protections in place for these animals.
Did they die because they were hunted?
In 2017,
Yeah.
they died because they either got hit by a large ship or because there was active fishing going on and they were getting entangled into fishing gear. So I remember like every day they would be doing a necropsy on the beach of one whale and they would get a call saying, hey, we found another one, you're going to be busy again tomorrow. And it just kept happening. All of us were like, what is going on? So, yeah, that's not cool. We do have some whales that have actually rounded the Florida Keys and gone up into the Gulf of Mexico. That's a question on the test. For those of you who don't know where Fort Pierce is, it's like right in here. So they do go past Fort Pierce. Sometimes they go way farther than they need to. Amazingly, they find their way back to the summer feeding grounds. We've actually had a mother and her calf go all the way to Corpus Christi, Texas. They just kind of swim to the beat of their own drum. And I believe that was Derecho. We're going to talk about her later.
Good question.
Yeah, Lisa.
So has Canada stepped up to the plate?
Canada has done a very good job of working quickly. Their government does not require the timeline that the U.S. requires, so they were able to put a lot of provisions in place pretty fast. They slowed the ships down. They're closing the fisheries at certain times when we know the right whales are going to be there. So they've done a pretty good job. Yeah. This is a bar graph just to show we talked about that low birth rate that they have. And this is 2009 to 2018. And these dark blue bars represent the number of females that have the potential to give birth. They're either old enough to have their first calf, maybe they've had a calf previously and it's been long enough that they might give birth again. So every year, we look at how many females out there have the potential to give birth to a calf. And unfortunately, we've seen some pretty low numbers of actual births. So the number of whales that could be giving birth and don't is staggering. In 2018, we did not have a single calf born to this population. That had never happened before. So as far as our population stats go, I already told you our total population is 336. Only a year ago, it was 366. We lost 30 animals in 1 year for a population that small. So that was shocking. We think about 70 of them are breeding age females. 85% of the population has scars from an entanglement, and 50% of the population has been entangled more than once. We've seen 1-year-olds with scars. It's just unavoidable for these guys, depending on where they go. Males outnumber females 2 to 1. You've got a population that you want to see grow. You'd like to see more females than males. That's not the case here. And like I said, we're not letting them live out a natural lifespan. So a lot of these animals are dying, not just when they're younger, but some of them don't even get to reproductive age. Some of them don't make it through their first year. I'm going to be talking about one that didn't live more than a week. So that's not great. When you combine a low birth rate and a high death rate, we're talking about a clear path to extinction. And right now they say if all of this doesn't change, we are looking at 2040 as the time when they're probably going to be biologically extinct, which means they're just not going to be able to reproduce anymore. That's when I have to take a deep breath. That number came out like 4 years ago, and every year when they reassess the population, we're hoping, oh, maybe they'll change that number. Nope, it's been 2040 for the last 4 years. Stats are not changing.
Julie,
Yes.
is there a correlation between water temperature and the males versus females born?
That's a good question. I have no idea. It sounds like turtles. I know turtles' temperature affects gender. I don't think that's the case with these guys. Now, temperature is going to affect food and who gets pregnant and how many calves they have, but I don't think it determines gender of the calf. That's just a guess, though. I've had people ask me why we should care about whales. A long time ago, I was like, because they're cool. They're fun to watch. Everybody likes whales. Turns out they play a huge role in combating climate change. They help produce half the oxygen we breathe on Earth. These whales distribute nutrients throughout the ocean that help feed the phytoplankton, which is what's producing oxygen for us. So, the International Monetary Fund put a $2 million value on every great whale out there between what it does for our fishing industries, our whale watch industries, how they help combat climate change, they sequester CO2, and when they die, they take all of that to the ocean floor and feed other animals. So they really are more important than a lot of people think. And they're at the top of the food chain and the bottom of the food chain all at the same time. Any questions so far? Yes. What do I mean by capturing CO2? Is that, Joel, help me out. Is that a phytoplankton thing?
So there's two big things. The phytoplankton is a real big one.
Yeah.
They're a carbon store. They're a carbon sink. Anything that is alive, anything like plants, trees, mangroves, they store carbon. So when they die, that's carbon released back into the earth, the atmosphere. So it's better to be in an object like a whale. The phytoplankton thing is they're a pump for the ocean. They create more oxygen and we breathe. Literally eat the zooplankton that was going around, and then the pump part is kind of as they excrete it back out at the surface, they can't release it down below, they release it up at the surface, and that is rich in iron and other stuff that grows phytoplankton. It gives us a very large amount of oxygen.
Yeah. So like we take in CO2 and anyway, plants do that a lot. Yeah, so the fact that they're not decaying at the surface and releasing that carbon, they're taking it to the ocean floor and keeping it down there is huge. So this season, for those of you who follow these animals or want to start doing it, every year we get a very small portion of the population here. At one point, we used to think it was just the pregnant females that were coming down here to give birth. Turns out when we started identifying the individuals, we figured out it's not just the pregnant females. We see non-pregnant females that we think might play some sort of like a midwife role sometimes. We see males, we see juveniles, we see yearlings with or without their mothers. There's kind of spattering of all sorts of animals out there. So it's not necessarily just the pregnant females, but it is still a very small portion of the population. We have 336 whales in this population, and we've only seen 34 of them down here in the southeast. One of the big mysteries about these guys is that we really don't know where they go in the wintertime. 40 years, we still have no idea. So 12 of these individuals have given birth, which is great. I was hoping we'd hit double digits by New Year's Day, and we did. The 10th one was discovered on New Year's Eve. They're aged anywhere from 17 to over 40, and we've got a couple that just gave birth to their 7th calf. So when you're talking about those long calving intervals and being able to have 7, that's a pretty good reproductive history. I think the record is 9 right now. We haven't seen any give birth to their 10th. Hopefully, we will.
So did you see calves off the coast of Florida this year in 2022?
Yes, actually, one of them was off New Smyrna on December 22nd. So, and that was Rachel, right? We're gonna talk about her. She's a very cool mom. She's one of those whales that does very strange things. There are still at least 7 potential mothers out there that we've identified as, they're female, they're either old enough to give birth for the first time, or it's been long enough since their last calf, so we're just kind of watching to see what happens. The New England Aquarium actually gave us a heads up and said, hey, we actually did a pregnancy test on one of them, and we're pretty sure she's positive, so keep an eye out for her. I don't think we've seen her yet. So she's floating around out there somewhere. Her name's Koala. So, yeah, it's something different every season. We got some weirdos. Several years ago, we saw mothers trading calves, and they would go back up to the feeding ground with a calf that belonged to somebody else. You never know. Hey, if I thought I could get away with that and trade kids with my neighbors, I'd probably do that at least for a while. One of those spectacular moms this year is snow cone. I don't know if anybody's heard. They've been on the news, especially up in North Florida. Snow cone is the only North Atlantic right whale that has given birth to a calf while entangled. She's not really entangled, but that's how it comes out sometimes. Typically, an entanglement involves wraps around appendages or the head or body parts. Right now, this rope is just stuck between a couple baleen plates, so it's not really hurting her. Oh, we could get into some stories. Okay, so this was a rope that was looped through the baleen, and it had one longer end and one shorter end. This mother lost her calf 2 seasons ago. And when it was 6 months old when it died, so she did not go through the full year of raising that calf and the energy expenditure that takes. And she came back, she got pregnant again within a year and gave birth again. So now we're watching to see if this calf grows at the same rate as other calves do, if her entanglement is causing a problem. We're monitoring this mother and calf very closely. She was off Amelia Island yesterday. But we've had some well-meaning citizens try and take things into their own hands, and they went out and tried to cut rope off her just for the heck of it. They're like, I can help this animal because it doesn't seem like anybody else is. There were actually some kayakers off Ponte Vedra Beach that kayaked out to her and started cutting some of this rope off. So I just wanted to let you guys know that even though it seems like nobody's doing anything about this, a lot of people are. There are professional disentanglement teams, there are wildlife biologists that are reviewing every photo that's taken. We're keeping a really close eye on these guys. So, wanted to let you know that. Derecha is one of those mothers that, this is the one that was off New Smyrna 2 seasons ago. She also lost her calf. This was the 1 week old that ended up with a fatal wound. This piece of soft tissue was severed by a boat propeller. It's actually supposed to be over here. It's just kind of dangling, so if you folded it over, it would be on the top of the head. So, it came off. This whale literally has like half a head. They did go out and inject antibiotics into it, hoping that if it healed over and somehow this calf made it, at least they could help prevent an infection. But we found out it couldn't even nurse because a lot of the baleen plates were gone as well.
Why is it wrong to just try to disentangle whale from?
That's a good question. I'm gonna go back. So, the professional disentangler, so we've known about this since last March. She was discovered up in the Northeast US with much more gear on her than she had. They actually removed 300 feet of rope already. They got it down to this length, thinking that drag was going to help pull the rest of it out. They were in an area where they were feeding, the whale's mouth was open a lot, maybe drag is just going to pull the rest of the rope out. We'll see what happens. The good thing is, the fact that she showed up with a calf means that she was finding enough food. She was able to eat enough food. She had a very good body condition, and the fact that she could carry a pregnancy to term and give birth to a calf meant that she was healthy. So we're like, you know what? We're just going to leave her alone and see what happens, because the stress of people and boats approaching these animals really messes with them. And now that she has a calf, we don't want to interrupt any mom-calf bonding behavior. We just want to let them be whales. She's not in any danger. It's not a life-threatening situation. I compare this to sticking a piece of dental floss in your teeth and just leaving it there instead of taking it out. It might be annoying, but it's not hurting her. They left one end of the rope longer than the other to produce more drag. So they actually did that on purpose, and the kayakers went and cut that long end and the knot off, which actually made the situation worse. So that's why we don't want to interrupt them. We don't want to give them any undue stress. And now that she has a calf, we're like, no, we're just going to leave you alone. And the closer you have to get to them, it puts people's lives in danger too.
Julie?
Yes.
It's also illegal, right?
Not for the rescuers, but it was for the kayakers. Yeah, the general public can't be within 500 yards of these animals. So for those guys, and of course, you know, they had to film their rescue efforts and post it on Facebook. So that's how we found out about it. And of course, they ended up on the news. Look at these people who helped the whales. And we're like, no, that's not good. So definitely a lot of education that needs to be done. But there were a lot of people commenting on news articles and social media posts that were very negative. They're like, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? It's just the fact is they didn't know who was or how many people. So we are definitely paying attention to those guys. That was a great question. Thank you. So like I said, entanglements are their number one killer. It's a slow, painful death. You know, I talked about snow cone being healthy enough to give birth and finding enough food. That's what's impressive, because entanglements usually result in starvation. A lot of times they can't feed. They end up with ropes in their mouth that drag back here. They might get wrapped together. They end up with a lot of trailing line behind their tails. Sometimes their flippers get wrapped and pinned against their body. Their tails will get wrapped up. This is one where the whale is swimming away from us and his tail flukes are underwater. And there's rope right here that's just becoming embedded in the tissue. It rubs the skin off, it rubs the blubber off. You start seeing muscle. It's not a good thing. And they'll either die from starvation or an infection. It takes 6 months. Here's a whale they hauled out of the water for a necropsy. So this is the upper jaw right here. This is all the lower jaw. So there's rope going in and out of the baleen. It's wrapped around the rostrum up here. It's exiting the mouth back here, and this is the whale's eye. So a lot of times these ropes get near or actually rub across the eyes, the blowholes. It can't be a comfortable situation. So, gotta be painful. This is Kingfisher. He had a dozen wraps around one flipper and about 25 to 30 wraps around his other flipper, and the rope connected the two flippers across his back. He had a life-threatening entanglement at only 1 year of age, and he was discovered off St. Augustine back in 2003. Amazingly enough, he ended up in pretty good shape and came back here every single year for more than a decade. It got to the point where our surveyors, everybody would place bets to see who was going to see kingfisher first, because we just knew he was going to show up. Last year marked the year they declared him dead because he quit showing up 6 years ago. 6 years is the magic number when they just give up on him and say, yeah, he's probably done. Here's an entangled whale up in Canada. You saw that baleen plate that Lisa had? It's supposed to be straight and vertical, hanging from that upper jaw. This rope actually bent to the baleen plates in half, and now they're sticking up out of the mouth. There's a buoy and a float and all these twisted ropes wrapped around his head. This whale actually got out of this himself. Don't know how, I would have liked to have seen that, but he sure did. And then there's vessel strikes. When I started this 23 years ago, it was actually vessel strikes that were their #1 killer. And there have been so many measures put in place to protect them from vessel strikes that it has moved down to #2, and now entanglements are the worst thing. So this was a young animal that was hit by a boat propeller. So all of these lines are cuts from the propeller. Sometimes the vessel strikes don't kill the animal. These are all scars that they're left with. These are boat propeller marks right here. We have no idea what kind of role scar tissue plays in how these whales get along. Socially, reproductively, migrating, all that stuff is probably affected. Here's an animal that lost most of its tail fluke. A boat propeller can easily chop an appendage off, much like this. We had a whale back in 2016 that actually came into Sebastian Inlet with her calf, and her name was Clipper. Her tail looked like this. Makes them really easy to identify, though, if you gotta look at the bright side. Here's an incident that happened last season. We had a 1-month-old calf get struck by a boat that was coming into St. Augustine Inlet at dusk on February 12th. It actually struck a mother and a calf that were sitting just below the surface, and the calf ended up pretty much dying instantly. It had propeller cuts on the left side of its head, across the back. We attended the necropsy on this animal. It had 5 broken ribs, a crushed skull, a punctured lung, and the cut that killed the animal went right through the vocals. So, fortunately, it died quickly, we think. Yeah, the mother to that animal was spotted about a week later with cuts on her back as well, and we haven't seen her since. So, it was the loss of a young animal plus a reproductively active female that probably could have given birth to several more calves. So, it's hard to take sometimes. There have been a lot of things been put in place to stop the vessel strikes. We've shifted to shipping lanes, both here in the southeast and the northeast. So we took, this was the original shipping channel right there, and because this area right here had fewer sightings over many years, they actually moved the shipping lanes northward to go through an area where they thought there was less of a chance that it was going to strike a whale. So that has worked. We've reduced the vessel speeds. There's a law that says any vessel 65 feet or greater has to slow to 10 knots when it's right whale season. So we're not saying a collision's not going to happen, but if there's a chance that that strike is not going to be fatal, we'll take it. Because the shipping industry definitely, they play a part in all the decision making too. I mentioned the 500-yard approach law earlier. That applies to vessels on the water, any aircraft, whether it's helicopters, planes, drones, it doesn't matter. Unless you have a scientific research permit, you cannot be within 500 yards of a North Atlantic right whale. And those laws are there not just for the whales, but for us too. If we've got a mother that's trying to protect her calf and she's out there tail slapping the water to try and tell you to get away and you're too close, you could die. So I've seen that happen. As far as entanglements go, they're trying to reduce the breaking strength of the ropes by introducing weak links in the gear that the fishermen are already using. So about every 40 feet, there's a weak link. Do we have one on our toe?
Actually,
Just regular rope.
yeah.
I was hoping we had one we could pass around. So they actually came up with these pieces of rope that have a reduced breaking strength. So if they incorporate those into the nets that they're already using, the idea is if an adult gets an entanglement, he should be able to get out of it. But these weak links don't work for calves. They don't necessarily work for juveniles. It's just the adults. It's a temporary band-aid situation until we can figure something else out, which right now is ropeless fishing gear. There are a lot of fishery closures going on, and we're trying to give incentive to fishermen. Say, hey, if you want to be able to fish during the closure, use this ropeless fishing gear that is much safer for the whales, and you can still come out and catch what you need. So I'll talk about that here. We've got seasonal management areas and dynamic management areas that involve laws like the 10-knot ship speed rule, closing down fisheries. The seasonal management area is like right whale season here, like it's just the whole 4-month season where they shut down gillnet fisheries in Florida. The dynamic management areas are when whales pop up when they're not in a seasonal area. So if they show up and they're like, oh, there are right whales here, they put a lot of provisions in place in that specific area for a 2-week period. Give them enough time to move out. And then there's passive acoustic monitoring, where we've got buoys out there just listening for right whales. Even though we can't see them, if we can hear them, we know they're there. So sometimes those trigger dynamic management areas too. So here's the ropeless fishing that Joel and I have tried to get involved in the last couple of years, and fairly successfully. We've been learning how to use at least 8 different kinds of gear that's out there. There are different manufacturers building these things, and the idea is it stores these vertical ropes that mark the trawls at the ground, the ocean floor, so that these vertical lines are not in the water column. So the folks that fish for lobsters and crabs usually have a vertical line marking each end of the trawl that's attached to a buoy at the surface, so they know where they left their gear. And when they're ready to come back and haul in their catch, they just find their buoys. But it's those vertical lines that the whales are getting tangled up in. So if we can keep it down here and send an acoustic signal when they're ready to pull their traps in, then it just pops up on demand, and then they can haul it in. So we don't have those persistent lines in the water column for days or weeks on end. Here's another example where we've got an inflatable bag that sits on the top. So when the acoustic signal goes down, it triggers air to go into the bag, and it just raises the trap to the surface. Questions about that? It's actually pretty cool. We've seen it work. It works, I swear, but it is expensive right now. We're hoping the government will subsidize it for the fishermen. The Northeast Fisheries Science Center has a big gear library where the fishermen can come check out the gear and go test it out, learn how to use it, and when they're done, they can just return it, which I think is pretty cool. We just have to actually talk them into doing it. I talked about snow cones. So, as far as what to look for, how many of you actually spend a good amount of time at the beach? A few here and there? I've taken calls where people have asked me if we have submarines off our coast. I'm like, I don't know anything about the military, what they're doing, but I do know we have whales off the coast. I'm like, what are you seeing? These adults are at least 50 feet long, and they weigh 50 to 70 tons. They're massive, and they sit right behind the wave break. Their calves are 15 to 20 feet long when they're born, and they weigh a ton. They're not small either. And I'm glad I'm not a whale. Oh, I got it. So as far as what to look for, they've got a very black body, black skin, almost everywhere, except for maybe a belly patch, or it might extend up under the chin. So this is really the only white skin we might see. Not a lot of right whales have white bellies, so it makes them easy to identify. They also have no dorsal fin on their back. This is one reason why vessels strike them, is because there's nothing coming above the surface of the water that tells people that there's an animal there. If they're sitting right below it, you cannot see them. Now that sport fisherman that killed the calf earlier, he was coming in at dusk. They were sitting below the surface. There's no way he could have seen them. So, no dorsal fin is one thing to look for. The callosities on the head, and there's some pretty good pictures in that brochure of the callosities, if you want to take a look at that. These are still actually black skin. Oh, this is where you come in, Joel. They are born with these rough patches on their head that are very similar to calluses on us. But the reason they look white is because of these whale lice that actually live on their heads, and they eat the dead skin off. I see you all getting the creepy crawlies. So we're passing that jar around so you guys can all see the whale lice. Is Heather here? She's gonna want to be like, I'm gonna hold the jar. She thinks they're cool. I think they're pretty cool too. So I wanted you to note that the tails are black on both sides. Their pectoral flippers are also black on both sides. They're really kind of square and stubby, paddle shaped compared to other whales we've got out there. And they've also got that really high jawline because of the baleen plates that they have in their mouth. The baleen only hangs from the upper jaw, so all this room on the lower jaw is making room for those baleen plates to hang down. Question? Doing okay? Okay. So these callosities that I mentioned, they are born with it. I don't know how easy this is to see, but these raised patches right here are the callosities. You've got dots on the mandible all the way down here. You can see the patch on the top of the head. They have callosities where people have hair. So the top of their head, over the eyes like eyebrows, lips and chin like a beard. But they don't get the whale lice until they're born, and it transfers from the mother to the calf during all the touching that they're doing. So, we don't use callosities for identification during their first year of life, but these patterns that they make are as individual to them as our fingerprints are to us. So if we can photograph the patterns on these whales' heads, we can actually tell who the individuals are. All of that information goes into a database kept by the New England Aquarium in Boston. And it's actually online. If you guys want to Google right whale catalog, you can actually look up whales by their name or their ID number. So if you read about some of these guys in the newspaper, or if you want to go look up information on snow cone or derecha that I'm talking about tonight, you can go do that and learn their sighting history, their age, who their mother is. You can look at pictures of them. It's actually pretty cool. We also use the whale lice for health assessment. Sometimes the lice migrate to other parts of the body. Sometimes they appear different colors. If that happens, it's usually an indication that the whale is sick or compromised. We see this in entangled whales where they might be near open wounds. So we also use that to tell if the whale's sick or not. So these are images of the tops of right whale heads, just so you can see how similar and yet how different these patterns are. Oh, they're looking. I thought you had a question. There are people that actually sit around and compare all these photographs to the catalog of known images and can tell who's who. And we do that every season. It's amazing how fast some people can look at a whale and say, oh, I know who that is. The folks that do the aerial surveys with Florida Fish and Wildlife, they can look at it from the air and know exactly who they're seeing. It's kind of crazy. I can only do that with like 4 or 5 of them. Get there. Here's a right whale on its side, just waving at you. So I wanted you to see the shape of that flipper, the fact that it's black. This is a white-bellied whale. So all these little lines are also really good for photo ID. Makes it easy to tell who the whales are if they have a white belly. So their tail flukes are also really smooth on the edges all the way around. They've got that deep notch in the middle, really broad. Right whales also blow in 2 different directions. No other whale does that, at least not here. When they come up to exhale, they will blow water in a V-shaped spout because they have 2 blowholes like all other baleen whales, and their blowholes just happen to be far enough apart that it will go in 2 different directions. So that's something to look for. If you see a whale off the beach and you're not seeing a tail and you're not seeing the flippers, you don't know if it's got a white belly on it, look for the blow. They have to breathe like typically every 3 to 5 minutes. And if you're at the right angle, you should be able to see that spout go in 2 different directions. So that's a telltale sign that you're looking at a right whale. There it is from the air. I don't know how many of you are going to be in the air when you see one, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. We do have humpback whales off our coast, and the juveniles will come in pretty close to feed. So things to look for are the white patches on the underside of the tail, and the edges. This trailing edge is really raggedy and bumpy looking. The tips of the flukes point up a little bit. So if it's got a lot of white on the tail, it's probably going to be a humpback, not a right whale. Humpbacks also have a little dorsal fin about 3/4 of the way down their back. It's not huge, but it's there. Looks like a little hook. And the way they swim, they will always round their back and show you that dorsal fin. We might not see their head very much, their tail might not come out of the water, but you will typically always see a dorsal fin if it's a humpback. And then they've got those really long, skinny, white pectoral flippers on the sides of their body. You know, this is something I don't tell people. Humpbacks also have these rope pleats on their ventral side. Right whales don't have that. So if you ever make out these lines when a humpback is breaching, that's a good indication it's a humpback. So their baleen plates, they have at least 250 to 300 of them in their mouths. Again, good reason why whalers used to take them. They got a lot of baleen out of each whale. I know right whales can get to be 7 to 10 feet long. These plates, do you know how big this one is? And do we know if it's a right or a bowhead? We don't. Lisa doesn't know. I'm kidding. So yeah, they're pretty good size, taller than a lot of people. So they're skim feeders. You know, they don't have teeth, so they don't need to chew that little tiny food. And all they do is skim the surface of the water with their mouth open. They need 3,000 pounds of those copepods a day just to survive. So they eat as much as they can in the summer until that food disappears. And once they head out of the feeding grounds, they're on their own. They have to live off their fat. So that's why they go after those copepods with that lipid sac in it, because it helps them gain weight pretty fast. They can hold their breath for 20 minutes if they need to dive to go find their food. And we know they can go about 600 feet down looking for it because they've come up from the bottom of Bay of Fundy with mud on their heads. So we're like, oh, you've been playing on the bottom. But that's what it looks like. They just take the water in, There's actually a hole in the front of their mouth where the baleen plates don't go. So the water goes in, they close their mouth, they use their tongue to push the water through the baleen plates, and all the copepods just get stuck on those little hairs on the edges. Reproduction in these guys, they usually become reproductively active at about the age of 10. A lot of times females are a little bit younger. A few years ago we had a couple first-time moms that were 6 and 7 years old, which was surprising. Well, they had to have gotten pregnant when they were 5 and 6, so that was pretty young for them. They always give birth to a single calf. We have never seen twins. I imagine a single calf is a big energy expenditure, so for them to give birth to two, one would most likely die. They go through a 12 to 13 month gestation period and give birth tail first, which is what all marine mammals do, unless they do it weird. The calves are nursing, so even though the adults are fasting, because there are no copepods to eat here, the calf is still eating. It's got to build up that blubber layer and have the energy to make a 1,200-mile migration back to the feeding grounds so mom can get some food and then teach the calf how to eat regular food when nursing isn't an option anymore. So, for those of you who wonder where the wave break is and how close these whales come, they come pretty close. So you can definitely see these whales from the beach. You do not necessarily need binoculars. If you have them, you'll thank yourself. You can definitely make out more details if you have binoculars, but they're not difficult to see usually. This is a mother. This is her head. And this is a calf right here, the calf's head. So calf is following behind. Another example of how close they come. Our network is based on all these oceanfront homeowners, people who live in condos, work in oceanfront businesses, beachgoers, and even if you hang out on the beach a lot, just take a look every once in a while. I belong to a beachcombing group. I have to remind them, stand up every once in a while and look behind you. You never know when there might be a 50-ton animal 300 yards away. It's a good stretching activity, but yeah, I hang around a lot of people that are out looking for shells, looking for sea glass, looking for sea beans, and they always have their eyes to the ground. But just say, stand up and stretch every once in a while, look at the water. Let me know if you see anything. So if you do end up seeing something, we've got a hotline that we've been using since 1997 so that people can report sightings. This is on the brochure that we handed out. Did anybody not get a brochure? Let us know. We've got plenty. We need some over here. This is Marine Resources Council's number. This is NOAA's hotline number. This originally was established for dead, injured, and entangled whales. But if they get calls on this number and it's in our response area, they turn around and call us anyway. So if you want to get rid of the middleman, I recommend putting this number in your contact list on your phone, and that way you'll always have it. You don't have to go Google it later. I hear people are so excited when they see a whale because they never think it's going to happen to them, and then they completely forget everything that they're supposed to do. So at least if you have it in your phone, you won't have to go look it up somewhere. And we do like you to call us when you're still looking at the whale, because we're probably going to ask you questions that you might not be able to answer if you've already left. So it's good to have it in your phone and keep your phone with you. Something I hear a lot, they're like, well, there's got to be like 50 people standing on the beach with cameras and binoculars, and they're all looking at these whales. So I'm sure you've gotten some calls. I'm like, nope, I haven't. So don't assume that somebody else has already called me. There might be a really good chance they didn't. So I would rather take 50 calls on the same sighting than not hear about it at all. and lose the chance to collect data and to warn all the ships in the area where the whales are. So, I love phone calls. I'm going to assume that you're going to call me while you're still looking at the whale, but we have actually had people call on different days that the sighting happened. Back in 2011, we had a woman report a sighting 5 months after the fact, and we actually ended up getting data out of it. You never know. So, if you're calling when the whale's not there, we do need a date and the time of the sighting. A location is good. The more specific you can get, the better. I cannot tell you how many people say, like, I'm across the street from the 7-Eleven, and I'm like, what city are you in? They go, oh! I'm like, I'm not necessarily right down the street from you. So I do get that a lot. If you have an address, a beach access number, an intersection, anything like that helps. We like to know the number of whales you're looking at, whether or not any of them might be calves. We'd like to know what direction they're swimming. If we can't get there for an hour or two, and you can't stand by the whales until we get there, we need to know what direction we need to go to find them again. So heading's good, distance offshore, if you can ballpark that, any contact information so we can get back to you if you have to leave a message, are all good things to have. So that's what we look for. But then I have people who say, that's great, I can do that, I can look for whales and I can call you if I see them, but what are you going to do with the information that I give you? Oh, you guys help us set all sorts of events into play. I already told you we're alerting the ships and the ports in the area where the whales are. That's like one of the first things that happens. When we're out in the field and we see humans getting too close, whether it's in boats, on jet skis, kayaks, paddleboards, surfboards, with drones, whatever, we're trying to document that so we can educate the people on the fact that they're not supposed to do it. We do report things to law enforcement. You know, we just let them take care of it. We're like, here, this is what we saw. If an animal is entangled, like snow cone, and people are calling our hotline, like her rope was visible from shore by people not using binoculars. They could tell they were looking at an entangled whale. We're in touch with Florida Fish and Wildlife. They might send a plane out to document the nature of the entanglement to see if anything has changed. They're taking pictures of the calf to make sure it's growing at the right rate, things like that. So if there's a disentanglement response that needs to happen, we're either jumping onto it ourselves or we're talking to other people who are going to go out, and we get that going. Florida Fish and Wildlife does biopsies on these animals and actually they collect genetic information. Every time a calf is born, they take a small sample of skin and blubber and send it off for genetic analysis, and it goes into a genetics database. So we can actually learn the gender of the calf before it's reproductively active. We can track the families genetically, which actually is not difficult with only 336 of them. So we make sure that Florida Fish and Wildlife is aware of the calves that we have in our area as soon as we find out, because it might be an animal that they haven't biopsied yet. So they'll come and get a sample. We try to alert our volunteers. Once you guys take that test tonight, you're going to get on a call list where if we hear about a sighting in New Smyrna Beach, we're going to call you and say, hey, we're on our way out to respond to a sighting. If you want to come watch whales with us, this is where you need to meet us. So we try really hard to alert you and make sure you know where they are so that you can come see them too, because we don't want you to go through all this and not be able to enjoy it. So we do that. And then, you know, anytime you can help us educate people on the beach, because we get busy and we tend to have people come up and ask us what we're doing. So anytime you can tell them what you learned here tonight, that helps us out too. Or even if you can stand by and just keep an eye on the whales until we get there. That's another huge help, because a lot of times we could lose them in 10 minutes. It doesn't take much to lose one. Some people ask us what else they can do just as a general citizen, and I always tell people to shop local as much as you can. Support your local farmers markets. Think about where your groceries come from, your clothes, your furniture, whatever. Anytime you buy something from overseas, it has to get here on a ship. And every time we're putting something on a ship, and it's going across an ocean, it's putting animals' lives at risk. So the less we do that, the better. Try any local seafood, that's a huge thing. Right now the issues are lobster and crab fishermen up in the northeast in Canada. So if you want to support the local seafood places that are bringing it right into the dock. I don't know what seafood places. Lisa, do you know if there are any good local ones here?
There's quite a few.
So just about all of them? Awesome, Miss Myrna rocks. Here's a great book that came out in October. This is Michael Moore. He's a veterinarian that has worked with right whales for 40 years. And he's gotten to know a lot of them personally, but he was also responsible for performing the necropsies on them when they died. So here they get to know these animals, and he's like, oh, now I have to figure out what killed it. And so he tells a lot of personal stories and how we can all protect right whales just in our everyday lives. So We Are All Whalers is a good book. If you're all interested in checking that out, that's a good one. Oh, apparently my battery's running low. I never plugged in. It's a good thing I'm almost done. So that's just the whale sighting hotline there again. My email address is on that brochure as well. If you learned anything tonight, take away the 500-yard law. That's huge. I was on the phone with somebody just yesterday. We've got a mom and calf, and she was on the beach. She said, I was just talking to a guy who says he's going to get on his paddleboard and go paddle out to it. And I said, please tell him not to do that. It's illegal for starters. So yeah, we just don't want to interrupt that bonding period that mothers and calves go through while they're down here. As far as becoming a volunteer, with you guys filling out those tests that I'm going to tell you, if you did your name and your address and everything on the first one, you don't have to do all that all over again, just your name is fine. I'm automatically going to put you on our volunteer list because I know you've been taught all this stuff about right whales. But as far as becoming a volunteer, we don't require any big time commitment. It's really just knowing what to look for when you go hang out on the beach. Know the laws so that you can tell other people. There are social media groups that belong to the cities. Flagler Beach has a really active one. And everyone's telling everybody else where the whales are and where to go and what time they were there. Nobody says, hey, don't get in the water. Make sure you stay 500 yards away. Or here's the hotline number, please report it. So those are the kinds of things that you guys can do to help us out. Like I said, stand by until we can get there. Things like that. I know MDC has some extra brochures. You guys know of condos or places where you can post them or hand them out to educate others. Feel free to take extras. These are metal signs over here on the right, 3 feet by 4 feet, that are posted out at boat ramps and marinas and things like that to educate voters. Just a few examples of things that we witnessed on the beach. This was Chiminea last season. Jet skiers, that was a new one for me, even after 20 years. This is definitely not 500 yards. This is a mother. Her calf is back here by the motor. Hopefully it was turned off. This was Patrick Air Force Base back in 2009. We had a mother and her calf get split up by a couple recreational boaters. I tell you, it was only about 10 minutes, but it felt like a really long 10-minute period. And this is the kind of thing we send off to NOAA's law enforcement. If we can get the names of boats, registration numbers, things like that, we'll just pass it on. This is Halo back in 2014. She thought it'd be cool to bring her calf to Cocoa Beach during spring break. Not cool. It's not cool. She was approached by surfers, boaters, all sorts of people. This photo was actually emailed to me that week from a condo resident who said, I witnessed this. I want to know if you can do anything about it. I said, I'll pass it along. And turns out this was a commercial fisherman that had his website on his boat. And the captain's names were up here on the console. So we knew who to look for. Yeah, so that was a fun week. Just so you know, we've got our website. If you want to stay in touch with Marine Resources Council, you can check out the whale programs page there. There is a quarterly newsletter that goes out to the scientific community, but it's available to anybody. So if you want to register, you can do that. I'm the only one, up until yesterday, that answers the hotline. Sometimes you might get Joel. But if you have any questions, you can call me there or shoot me an email. There is a whale alert app that you can put on your phones, and they actually have a map on there with almost real-time sightings. So you can monitor the map or even make reports of whales through the app. So that's what that's for. Like us on Facebook. We try and post new information, things that we learn every season. So we're giving a bunch of updates. We'll share New England Aquarium posts and Florida Fish and Wildlife posts, and we'll put our other stuff up there. So, Wendy, is that you?
That's me over here, too.
I tried to make it big enough,
I
so
love
if
me a
anybody
QR
wants
code.
to try and do the QR code now, you can.
It worked.
Did it work?
Yep.
Cool. Joel be proud of that.
Yes.
He made me do that.
Good job.
It worked, Joel. Okay, so we do have t-shirts here tonight to raise money for the program. These are little toys that we have. We've got stickers. Joel told you about our new t-shirts with the right whale on the sleeve. We like that. So we got those available. I wouldn't be here without all of these folks. The Protect Florida Whales license plates. I've had one ever since they came out. They support programs like this and stranding programs and rehab programs for stranded animals and stuff like that. Pew Charitable Trust gave us money this year to advance our ropeless fishing work, and even Vineyard Vines had a fundraiser for us to kick off whale season this year. It was pretty successful, so we like Vineyard Vines as well. So, any questions? Holy cow.
Nice job, thank you.
Ah, you're welcome. Now the question is, did I cover all the answers